Welcome to It's a Controls Problem, where we do precision guesswork based upon unreliable data given to us by those of questionable knowledge. I'm your host, Charles Johnson. All right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of It's a Controls Problem. I'm your host, Charles Johnson. And with me, as usual, is my producer extraordinaire, Matthew Vanberg. Matthew, how are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
And we have a special guest here. His name is Joseph Aamidor, and he is the managing director of Aamidor Consulting. So, Joe, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Matt. It's good to be with you both.
So why don't we just get into it and just why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and what you are about?
Yeah, thanks for having me. So my background in terms of kind of role or subject matter expertise is product management, and we can unpack what is product management, but basically any company you buy from or use their products, they have product managers or somebody who is like a product manager, even if that title isn't exactly what they use. And my focus is smart building technology. And what does that mean? I think big picture, if you wanted to say, what is a smart building? It's a building that is deploying technology on top of the controls, on top of the base building systems and equipment, the HVAC system, lighting controls, access controls, and making the operational patterns in that building more efficient. You could say that's energy efficiency, that's staff efficiency, that's space efficiency. All of those would fall into the bucket of smart buildings. If you were looking for a headline, I would say we're trying to make that building operate better, and we're trying to deliver a better environment than maybe can it be achieved from just the base building systems that are in there. And I would say what I do is I work with a lot of different firms in this ecosystem. If they're a product company, help them improve their products, help them drive faster growth. If they're an investor, I can help them make better investments. And if they're a larger company, I can help them make sense of the space. What is happening in this cohort of small innovators, and do we have to be aware of this or not? Or is this a competitive threat, or is this a potential growth opportunity? So I do all of that. My background really quickly worked at Johnson Controls for a number of years, obviously a familiar name for everyone listening, as a product manager. And then I was the first product hire at a smaller company called Lucid that ended up getting bought by Acuity Brands, which also owns Distech, also probably a very familiar name to your listeners.
Yeah, no, definitely. I remember when Acuity bought Distech, and I was like, ooh, the game has changed, for sure. So, no, that's awesome. So, yeah. Joe, looking back at the start of your career, can you take us to the moment, or maybe is there a specific experience when you realized that smart buildings wasn't just a niche, but the future that you wanted to build your career around?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's funny because when I talk to people about their career paths, sometimes or often you get this point of, I didn't know this existed, but it's pretty interesting, and I started building a lot of expertise, and now I'm here, and it's been 25 years. I would say there's elements of that. If I go way back to how am I in this space, I think it started with some recognition that both the built environment was going to benefit from digitization. And you could argue that's a mouthful and that's like a buzzword, but the point being, we have a lot of infrastructure. It's not moving or necessarily completely turning over. The buildings that we have today are probably generally going to be the same buildings we have in 20 years. Some new buildings, but a lot of existing buildings. But then I also saw this bigger picture of just, energy costs are going up, energy efficiency, concerns around global climate change, like all of these things were coming together, and you were probably going to point to buildings and technology in buildings as a pretty interesting place to be, even if I had no idea what would actually happen in the next 5 years or 50 years. I spent a lot of time initially more in a consulting role and had a lot of clients, owners of real estate, that were bringing up these problems or these questions, right? Like there's regulatory issues, there's higher energy costs. I'm trying to figure out how to reduce those costs. I'm trying to deliver a better environment for my occupants, my tenants, both. And what I found was you could have various answers. Like the answer could be, well, let us do a study. But what I also thought and what I realized was there's actually just a technology answer. We'll bring you better technology. So working at JCI was a great example of that, right? We're going to bring new products to the market, and they and all their peers are pretty ambitious and pretty consistent in that they're bringing more than just the base building control system, the HVAC equipment. Those are still big drivers for their business, but that's not all they're doing. I guess you could circle back to now what I do is back to consulting, but it's really focused on helping those technology businesses think more strategically about what does the market look like? Where are their competitive pressures? How can you price, package, and position your product to win in the market? How can you think through the actual TAM, the total addressable market, and what does that analysis of the TAM tell us about where we should be investing our resources to build new products, to expand existing products? And so there's a level of sophistication that can really help you win in the market. And I can be, especially for small companies or companies where they need an outside of the building point of view, I can be that advisor, that trusted advisor and expert.
Yeah, we've over the year that we've been doing this, we've mentioned trusted advisor or being that trusted advisor quite a few times, which is really important to customers, because the more that they know that you have the ability to not only have their back, but being able to do the research and and then without a shadow of a doubt provide the solution that they need. It just really it really brings everything home. Speaking of like smart building technology, like what do you think right now, in at least in some of the with some of the products that you're seeing come about right now, what do you think is a really interesting piece of technology you see for smart buildings?
Yeah, I think that there's, you could argue that our market, not answer the question directly, I would say that our market often has no shortage of interesting technology at various asset classes or for various asset classes, various levels of the stack. I would argue figuring out like how to actually scale it is oftentimes the bigger issue. But we can get back to that if you'd like. More to interesting technologies, I think that there's a lot that you can do to bundle, or maybe not bundle, but match up alerts, faults, analytics coming out of a building, which oftentimes what you find is there's a lot of issues that can be addressed to save energy and improve comfort and improve operational efficiency and equipment life with the core systems that somebody is using to manage their workflow, so work order management. And I say that partially because, again, I could list off a lot of interesting technologies, but you're seeing some movement in the market where companies are trying to bring both together, where we don't only analyze data coming off of your building automation system and identify the biggest issue you have on a cost point of view or on a equipment lifespan point of view. We also can automate that or integrate that into your workflow. And that's pretty interesting because it touches on a couple of key themes that I see in the market. One, of course, is more data about individual assets and buildings, and then more broadly the building and the labor shortage, right? One of the challenges we have in this market is there's a shortage of engineers. So sometimes if you go to somebody who's running a building and has a team and say, I'm going to give you a new source of data that's going to identify a lot of problems you can fix, sometimes the feedback you get is, I don't have time to address even what I know I need to fix. I don't need another source to give me more things to fix. And that's a very fair point. I would say that sometimes I talk to innovative companies that don't realize like that's the actual what's going on, on the field. But if you can make the maybe higher value analytical capabilities of some solutions more integrated into the workflow, that actually drives better outcomes, but in a way that is more natural and fluid to those operators. So that's one that I've been, in my newsletter, have been writing a fair bit about. There's been a lot of interesting acquisitions and partnerships and just deals in general that really align with that theme. So I think that's one I would mention, but there's a lot of interesting stuff going on. We could keep going down that list if you wanted.
Yeah, absolutely. I like, for me, one of the big things that I'm getting a lot from people obviously is the integration of AI into smart building systems, and
Yeah.
specifically, what is AI doing? And right now, there are a lot of people, that are vibe coding and
Yeah.
letting AI do that. I actually made an AI palette, and I'll showcase it in a little bit for some people. I mean, privately somewhere,
Yeah.
but like right now, pretty much it can go and look at it can look at the history database, and it can look at some other features to kind of like give you a report of how the building is doing. Right now, I don't have anything in place to kind of talk to it like back and forth. Balderate.io literally just came out, or just advertised. They have like an AI chatbot that you can use, inside Niagara, which I think is kind of interesting. So,
Yeah.
a lot of people are thinking that AI is going to replace a lot of the engineering aspect, and I don't know if that's going to be it. I think that AI's role in the BAS industry is to take massive amounts of data and process it very quickly, significantly faster than what you and I can do, and then provide better suggestions and maybe even solutions using that data.
Yeah, I agree. What I would also tell you is actually something that I came across a couple weeks back. It's more, it's the Deloitte. I think they call it the Real Estate Outlook survey or study or report. But Real Estate Outlook, if you Google Deloitte Real Estate Outlook, and they do it every month or every year, so they just published their 2026. And I think the most interesting point that I saw in there was real estate companies being asked, "How are you using AI?" And there were basically options from "We have no interest in AI" up to "We are seeing transformational change," and then there were 3 or 4 options in between. We're seeing some incremental change, or it's been hard to deploy. And if you look at the data or the responses from 25 to 26, there was a fair bit of drop in "We're seeing significant value or transformational impact from AI," and a lot of it increase on "We're struggling to deploy, we're struggling to figure it out, we're struggling to actually like go beyond like implementation." And I think that's not so surprising to me because I've seen similar studies in other industries. But my point is there's huge value in AI, but I think for anyone listening who's trying to deploy AI, it's not going to necessarily be we spent a month figuring this out and now it's like completely rolled out across our organization. But I also think what that means is some of the biggest value we might find from AI, we're still in that learning, crawling phase. But I do agree, you have massive amounts of data. I think the flip side of that, the challenge is oftentimes the data isn't nearly as structured as it would need to be.
Right.
And I'm thinking if you have an equipment inventory and you're trying to figure out like, how can I use AI to improve my capital planning process, right? A lot of organizations, capital planning is a really serious, set of a really serious process they go through. But it might be just based on timelines, right? Oh, this chiller is 15 years old. We probably need to replace it. This other chiller is 12 years old. We don't need to replace as much. But maybe in reality, based on maintenance data, on even just history of individual pieces of equipment and how the longevity based on just like OEM data or data about that OEM product, you could argue, actually, you should be replacing your 12-year-old chiller before your 15-year-old chiller. And it would have been hard for you to do that analysis yourself, but we have a bunch of data. The challenge with that is, I think, even just the roster or the inventory of chillers or of, think of something that where you have a lot more of them, valves, actuators, other pieces of equipment, air handlers, VAV boxes, like all of the above, it might be very hard to even provide the data to an AI tool to get a useful output, but I think we'll get there, and we'll get there relatively quickly.
Yeah, and I think that goes on to the thought of what data do we need to keep and provide for our customers, right? Like, especially like if you're going through like some specifications or even like, let's say, a retrofit solution, right? I think like retrofit solution could be slightly better in this than new construction, because the fact that you're going in and becoming the expert, and then you can sit there and write whatever you want. Whereas like in new construction, you have to follow a specification. So in order for you to get more data into your building, you really need the consulting engineer and even the owners kind of like driving that portion. And
Yeah.
more to your point of like, looking at replacing like a 12-year-old chiller versus the 15-year-old chiller, yeah, it's like keeping that performance data around would be really important. Like, for things like that, instead of just using like current switches that just detect on off, well, now you need current transducers, right?
Yeah.
So then you can see like, oh, hey, based upon the last 5 years, we can see that this is not, the amp draw that that we had now has diminished by X amount percent, where this one is still going strong. So yeah, absolutely. I think that level of thought is going to be tough, and especially when you're trying to feed it into AI. Like I tell people now, like treat AI like a junior engineer, right?
Yeah.
You have to train it. Like, yes, it can take data and come up with with an idea, but if you're not driving it in the manner that you see, it's not going to the solutions that you see are not going to be as effective, where they should be. So I do think that we are getting closer and more people are going to do that. But I still think that from a smart building perspective, we still need to, I think we still need to uh, rethink how we are implementing systems and monitoring things like statuses and stuff like that already.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a fun time. I mean, I think fun and exciting time maybe is a better way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what do you think is the biggest misconception in the industry about smart building technology, and how do you think that view of maybe that misconception is evolving, to where we're going?
Yeah, I think that there's a few misconceptions, and I don't think this is a prioritized list by any means, but just to like list off a couple, you definitely have, I think, a challenge around what is smart building technology for what type of client and what type of building. And what I mean there is it's not ubiquitous in that there's this one thing that every building should do to become a smart building. Related to that, it's not like a light switch moment. Like we're not smart and now we're smart. I think you could argue there are certain things that make a building smarter versus maybe just connected, or maybe a little bit disconnected and not so data driven. But it's not always one thing or two things or like a precise checkbox or checklist where you check each box and all of a sudden you're smart. And I think that goes to note just the diversity of buildings we have. I think that the other misconception, there is a lot of savings to be had in buildings, just like dollar savings, which can be from energy savings. You reduce energy, you don't spend as much on energy, reduce maintenance calls or unplanned maintenance outages. There's like a cost there that you can avoid. Equipment life is another one, right? Like if I can better monitor how my equipment is performing and know when to fix things on more of a condition basis than a time basis or schedule basis, I will probably overall do better from a monetary point of view. So all these things are true. I think a misconception, though, is that it can take, just like AI, as we were talking just a moment ago, it can take effort and time and even cost to get to a point where you really get the most out of that or get the full value. So it's not as easy as just drop a gateway, pull data out, all of a sudden you're saving 10, 15, 20, 25% of energy on your building and your staff are 20% more efficient. They're getting 20% more done. It's typically in the real world going to take a little bit more effort to get to that outcome that is totally feasible, very doable, not at all fiction, but not as easy. So I think that's a misconception. And I sometimes see pitches or I talk to companies that are trying to improve their pitch and I say, look, you're making it sound almost too easy. And while, yes, you might have an example of this being really easy, across a portfolio that's national or across dozens or hundreds of buildings, I think it's unlikely that things go quite this smoothly. That's not to say there's no value or even there's not compelling value. It's just don't make it sound like you do nothing and you automatically just get all the savings. I think that's a misconception as well. There's probably others, but those are two big ones.
Okay. Yeah, I think you're right on that. It is tough because like when you hear things that you're like, well, is it is it really that? Like I say, is it though? Like,
Yeah.
when people want to, because obviously we want to sell a fast solution, right? And that's, and people want a use of, they want relative ease with it. And sometimes it's just not that easy. Yet somehow we want to try to say it is when really, there's a lot of work involved. And I know some people use it to just kind of get their name in the door, but then I'm like, well, do you like sometimes I feel like some people misrepresent that, and I'm like, well, I think
Yeah.
you're gonna have to take that loss on that one and learn your lesson there. So, um, you know,
Yeah.
uh, you mentioned talking about some smaller companies that could be innovative. So in your consulting work, you likely see companies falling in love with their own technology. So without naming names, like, can you share a story where a company built something that seemed like incredibly innovative, but maybe it just completely missed the mark on what facility managers or building owners actually needed?
Yeah, I think actually there's a couple versions of that story. I mean, I think that I definitely see examples of the technology is compelling, but it's in a. I'll give you a couple examples. So it's built with an optimal data landscape in mind, right? Like as long as we can get all these data sets very quickly and cleanly, we'll be able to deliver excellent, compelling value, right? Like there's a great ROI here. The challenge is like if you can't get those data sets quickly enough or at a cheap enough cost, or it's so disorganized you don't know what to do with it. That's a pretty big problem. And I think that you don't necessarily pick that up if you're piloting in a given building. You pick it up when you're piloting, or not beyond the pilot, right? You're deploying across a lot of buildings. I think that there are cases where solutions are built without context of the entire tech stack in mind. So you sometimes see solutions that really want to own from hardware up to services, right? We want to deploy product. We want to put the software runs on top of the hardware. We then have an array of managed services to support. The challenge there is typically that it's not it doesn't pencil in a lot of cases to rip out a lot of equipment and replace it. You do that with some cadence or schedule, but think of a large office building. If you just deployed new controls 5 years ago, I would argue if your new product is built with all that being ripped out and replaced with something new, it's probably going to be hard to do. Really, if you want to deploy analytics on top, what you really need to do is collect the data from the existing controls that are already out deployed in the building. So that's one. Sometimes in a lot of the work I do, two kinds of projects that are really common for me. One is competitive analysis, right? Like there are definitely companies out there that don't have a very clear picture of their competitors just because it hasn't been a priority, right? It's not a fault. It's just of all the things I need to prioritize, getting really detailed data about competitors is not one. And so sometimes their view of what they differentiate on isn't actually that differentiated. And there's all kinds of examples there. But that's where I can step in and help and say, look, like this is pretty compelling and differentiated, but this other thing is not differentiated. And here's 3 examples of why it's not. The other one is market opportunity. And I've actually had a couple calls. I wrote something in my newsletter a couple weeks back about just the controls TAM, the total addressable market, and trying to piece together both how big it is and how significant are the big players, which they from a revenue point of view are big, but they don't have like a dominant share of overall revenue. I would argue. All that said, there are definitely companies out there that might not think through the TAM in a way. It's like how much of that is actually like serviceable. How much of that can I grab in a near term, and why is it not as much as I might think, or is more than I think? And then just thinking through like pricing, and if you spend $3 a square foot on energy, whatever you're spending to save energy and save facility costs is going to be a fraction of that, right? So if you've kind of like inverted your business model where they're going to end up spending so much on this that it's just not worth it, sometimes coming with that perspective can be challenging as well. So I think there's kind of an array or a buffet of topics, but I think they all kind of cover the mark, Charles.
Okay. Yeah. I don't have anything else to add there. I don't think. No, you did a great job explaining that. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. No.
You know, here's a question I have. You know, why do you think there's a persistent gap between engineers developing these products and the people operating the buildings? Like, is it like a language barrier? Is it lack of field experience? A lot of sorry, words are hard. Like a lack of field experience, or is there something deeper in how we structure product development?
So I think, man, there's a lot to share there. I think that you have some companies, and again, not naming names. I actually don't know that I could think of a specific name, even if I wanted. But there are some companies that come with a very technology focused approach, right? Like I build technology, I develop technology, and I saw this huge opportunity in buildings because again, the vast majority of energy consumed in our world are from buildings, and there's a lot of waste there. I've seen different estimates, but I think in America, HVAC is within buildings. That's a significant chunk, and then the HVAC system is 40, 45, 50%. Could be more if there's a lot of refrigerated warehouses or refrigerated spaces. And then you say, let's say 20, 25, 30% of that is wasted, which is, I've seen numbers in that line. There's a lot of money to be saved. So you have some individuals who look at this and say, this is a huge opportunity. What's the solution to solve it or to address it? And sometimes they come in with more of from a top-down point of view, this makes perfect sense. Without necessarily, to your point, this bottom-up, how do buildings run today? Who are the people running the buildings? So I think that can be an issue. I think that in real estate and facility management in general, there's often a lot of risk aversion for good reason, but that can sometimes lead individuals to be hesitant to change how they're doing something. And maybe a good example, very specific, if you look at firms that have a value prop of, I will help you save 10 to 15% of energy with my analytics capability. Not vaporware at all. These are real solutions. They really work. They really can deliver that type of value. But sometimes what you hear from facility management staff or teams is, well, my energy is fairly consistent in terms of what I consume. The prices mean that, or the rates that I pay for energy mean that I'm not spending a lot more money. And no one is knocking on my door and telling me, hey, you spent, let's say, $100 last year on energy. Can you save 95 or can you spend 95 this year? Right? As long as it's just consistent 100, it's great. I'm good. I don't need to spend a lot of effort there. I can spend my time on other things. Now, the flip side, of course, now energy costs are going up. So if you spend or consume the same amount of energy, your costs go up. So I think that's an interesting driver that might change how we think about this market. But my point being, the impetus on the part of the facility leaders in some cases is consistency and predictability versus driving a lot of value when it comes to things like energy in the building. It's kind of thought of as a cost, and they'd rather spend their time making the building really compelling for the occupants, really compelling for prospective occupants and tenants, and if it's commercial real estate, having a really good outcome of the investors who put the money into the building.
So, would you say that like if you, like when you're stepping into a new engagement, like and a client is stuck, do you think cost is, do you think cost is what usually stops them in their tracks, or is there another underlying factor that may make them rethink their roadmap?
Yeah, and are you thinking client, the buyers and users of the technology, or the
Yes.
vendors? Yeah, the buyers and users. Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, so good. So I think that for them, it's a few things. Cost concerns or uncertainty is definitely one. I think that in some cases that manifests itself as, I know how much I'm going to have to spend on this, right? You gave me a quote, but your savings numbers feel possible, but maybe less than certain. So then it becomes, well, I know what I'm spending, but I can't really underwrite the ROI here because I might save half, or I might save, not everything you think I'm going to save, but half of it, a quarter of it, whatever it is. And that's going to change the ROI numbers quite dramatically. I also think sometimes it's just as simple as, this is a new line item. I need to go get buy-in from the finance department, and man, they're not interested in spending new money on new things, regardless of how compelling they might be or might not be. Some people have told me a lot of what smart building technology does reduces costs, but at core, everything is a cost center, and it's much easier for certain organizations to spend money on something that's going to drive increased revenue. And really, I've seen companies tell the story and kind of build the value prop around if you save energy, that improves net operating income. That's more commercial real estate focused, but it improves the net operating income. And what that will get you is a higher value to your building, which actually is revenue generating, because that might be an organization that in a few years is going to go and sell that asset, right? So if they can sell it for more, that's great. But that's for certain types of assets. So I think those are some of the challenges that are pretty common in our industry.
Yeah, I think from a vendor perspective, some of that is, the amount of market research that is being done, and even to the point, it's like, does the customer actually need this, right? Like you may think that it's pretty cool, and you might have an idea, but whether or not that could be sold to the customer, saying yes, if you use this, this is exactly what's going to happen. That's a whole completely different story. Like we can, because working for a vendor, we can put together, an estimate of what we think, you know, a customer is going to save or whatever. But until you actually see it, like, truly in a building and having tested it, like it's kind of hard to really put like a true dollar figure on that.
Yep, exactly. And I think you see a lot of piloting, you see a lot of firms that are looking to deploy these technologies, try different things, have maybe run with a few different vendors at once to see what's most compelling, what actually works out the most. And I think that while you see a lot of things on LinkedIn about, we don't want to get into like never ending pilots, I definitely understand why you would want to deploy on a pilot basis a couple of solutions, or one solution and see how it goes. It's obviously less, it might be less optimal for the vendors themselves, but in a lot of cases, if you're small, if you're innovative, you kind of have to prove your mettle before you can scale widely.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the old adage, you have to spend money to make money, right? Um,
Yep.
and sometimes vendors do have to take that risk. I like the idea of having more pilots available, because I think that it actually shows the market that you're willing to take those risks, to see what can actually pay off. But sometimes vendors spend too much time, they have blinders on, where they're looking and they're still focusing on this product that doesn't seem to really gain any traction. And it's like, oh, we still believe in it. But why do you still believe in it when you can see that the market doesn't believe in it? And then like all of a sudden now that becomes just like this financial sinkhole for some vendors. And it's like, now you need to figure out when to cut your losses and get back to the drawing board.
Yeah. No, I agree. No, it's a good point, Charles. Yeah.
Yeah, it's super hard, right? Because sometimes it's a matter of pride too, right? Because like imagine, you've put your blood, sweat, and tears into something, and like it's to your image, but is it really to like to the industry at large image, right? It may not, and sometimes that's a real blow to the ego, and some people just don't want to let that go, and that's tough because I know that there are some things that like some tools that that I've found like, man, I think this is super cool, and I think this would really work. And it's like, yeah, maybe it's there and maybe it's just not time yet for it. So like I just kind of put it back on the shelf, let it sit there for a little bit, and maybe I'll break it out later on, if there's a need for it. But there are some things that I've developed that I've really liked, and it's just like, damn, man, I was like, oh, that was like, I like, sometimes you just think it's so good, but then you realize like, yeah, maybe people aren't ready for that kind of thing yet. So no, I
Yeah,
absolutely
fair.
get it for sure. Um, you know, when still going with the smart building or smart building technology, like smart buildings are like inherently complex ecosystems. So how do you advise clients to balance the need for sophisticated data rich features with the reality that the end user often just wants like simplicity and reliability?
Yeah, so and you could argue just buildings are complicated even before you layer in anything that might be, modern smart building technology. I would say if you're a buyer or a user, and those can be two different groups within an organization that owns real estate, what I often advise is to be really crystal clear about what is the problem that you're trying to solve, and then maybe the next steps are, how have you tried to solve it? What has worked? What hasn't worked? What's the optimal outcome? And the reason I say that is if you flip it around, and I've definitely talked to firms that have bought solutions that they've said, oh, it's good, not great. In retrospect, they maybe are thinking maybe I should have done a better job buying. Sometimes the challenge they have is they don't go in with a really defined, discrete problem statement, right? Like, this is the problem I have. And it could be, a good example would be, we have, multiple building automation systems across our buildings, right? They're not all the same vendor, so there's no real easy way to bring them all into one place. And what we find is we're catching up on, the most, the worst alerts or faults after they should be addressed, right? So like we're basically not able to prioritize, and we're drowning in building automation system alarms. Very common issue, right? For a lot of just the ways building automation systems work. If that is your problem, that's going to, and that's your problem, and you even say, we've tried to throw people at the problem, right? So we've tried to have like a triage system with people where they review things but like that's not really working. We try to export everything to a spreadsheet, and then every morning we sort our spreadsheet, we find the problems, and that's not working. So like you've been able to kind of walk through like, this is the problem, this is how we've tried to solve it, and we haven't yet really found a good way to solve it. That gives you really good context to go find a solution, because then when you're talking to vendors, you're doing your own research, you're maybe engaging somebody like me to help you do that research. You can be very crystal clear of like, this is what we're looking for. But anyway, back to that point I was making on the flip side, sometimes I see buyers, they take the approach of, I want to learn what's in the market, and they get a little bit more focused on, this seems to be most compelling in terms of savings or value prop or ROI. And that might be true, but if it isn't solving a problem you yourself have in your portfolio, it's probably not the most important thing for you to deploy, right? It might have that ROI for the people who really need that kind of capability, not necessarily for every building out there.
So I guess when you're talking about like obviously when you have when you're dealing with customers with multiple control systems, is there, speaking of that, like, is there a control system that you try to lean in more than others? Like, is there a preference that in your experience have you seen, like, yeah, I've seen, like, let's say, Train, I've seen Train go ahead and bring this home better versus, maybe an advantage, like, whether someone's using Tritium or whether using, automated logic. Is there a specific one that you find that can do, like, maybe those certain things better, or do you try to stay as neutral as possible?
Well, so in my consulting work, I'm very neutral, right? I work kind of across the industry, so there are large controls companies that might engage me for very specific projects. There might be small innovators that engage me for projects. I don't know that I would say one is better than another. I think part of it is how is it integrated and deployed in your building, and that can be kind of based on the quality of the integrator, which may be one of those organizations, or maybe an independent integrator that is working on their behalf, has in that region, like we deploy this Tritium-based system for JCI, right? Like we're the FX ABCS. I used to work at JCI, so that there was a big ecosystem of ABCSs, and you could argue some of them are probably really good at certain types of buildings, others are good at other types of buildings. So you could argue what you really want to pick is who's the integrator that's going to give you what you want. I would say, in general, in the industry at the controls level or layer of the tech stack, I think there's just significant growth in Tritium-based systems. That's just becoming kind of almost like table stakes for some buyers, right? We just want it to be Tritium because we associate that with being open, less lock-in, more ability for extensibility in the future. And this ecosystem, as you noted earlier, of just a lot of kind of apps that you can run on the Niagara framework. I wouldn't say everyone says I must have tritium, but I think there's definitely been growth there, and that's just a market reality. Though, there are other controls products out there that have really good quals, really good capabilities. So by no means is it always going to go tritium's way.
Sure.
I think that when you look at the smart building layer, where I see generally more innovation and more interesting technology is probably on the part of the innovative startups that just come in with a bit of a fresh eyes of the problem. I think the challenge they have is they don't necessarily have the same reach that the larger peers do. To this risk aversion point, there's definitely cases where we're a buyer, we're looking for some compelling technology, and we're not sure we want to buy it from a small startup because it's just a small company. We're not sure they can support us or serve us or deliver for us maybe as effectively as the larger firm with a lot of resources. But I would also say the differences aren't always in the core software. The differences may actually be more around how well do they support you on upfront deployment, ongoing support, long-term, and also just the state of your buildings. I mean, I've definitely talked to individual building owners who maybe the entire stack from their HVAC system up to controls, up to the service contracts are all with one vendor. And they say, look, it just makes sense for me to expand and buy their cloud solution because I already have just such the relationship with them. They're already the provider of everything that I'm already buying within this realm. Whereas other folks might say, operators, owners might say, look, across my portfolio, I have a little bit of every OEM's gear and equipment. So going to one of them doesn't make sense. I'm going to find somebody who's actually an agnostic provider, and that might lead them towards an innovative startup or just a larger kind of software-focused company. And all of that is all those are considerations.
Yeah, admittedly, I appreciate all vendors and their products and what they and what they try to accomplish. Being in the industry as long as I have, I've been certified in a lot of different products and have experience among the majority of them. If I were going to have a building myself and have a system, I think one thing that I would look for, I think one thing that I think kind of gives Tritium an edge in some cases is development, because obviously they've opened a lot for third-party developers where other products right now they're like, yeah, that's not something they want to do right now. They have their own systems. Now, having said that, they've worked so hard on their systems that a lot of their systems are really solid. So it's like, do you really need a lot of development like that? The answer is probably not that much development, even at that particular point. There are probably some apps and stuff like that that kind of can work seamlessly with them. Especially let's say on the home automation side, a lot of people are using HomeAssistant.io and they're using a lot of Node-RED, and Node-RED is even getting more popularity, in the smart building application, especially when you're taking things like MQTT and stuff like that. And it's easy to actually pass things like that in Node-RED versus other applications. So, I think you're right. Vendor lock-in is a real thing, but even then, if you have a larger company that's providing a very good service to you, then sure, I'll stay locked in there because I know that this company treats me right. You're right that at times it does fall down to the contractor that's installed it and that has maintained it. Some companies and products get a bad rep because of just a poor installation at that time.
Yeah. No, agreed. I think there's a lot of dynamics at play, right? Oftentimes I talk to people and sometimes I see, I might do some work with an investor who's trying to do a market landscape analysis. And sometimes the goal, or an acquirer, right? We're looking to acquire businesses. Here's the places we need to. Sometimes they kind of oversimplify, and this is where I can really help, right? But they oversimplify the market down to which vendor is best. And what I try to help them during, if there's an engagement, is to say look, it's not a best or not best. It's for certain types of buildings with certain state, where they are in their life cycle with certain types of equipment, this might be the best solution. But you go to a completely different building, compare a restaurant chain with hospitals. The smart building solutions they're likely going to need and buy and see a lot of value out of are probably completely different.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what you're saying too.
Yep. Yeah, like, especially again if you're doing, like, you have one that really cares more about air quality, versus, and obviously air quality, people care about in restaurants, but like obviously, more on their side, they care about not making people sick from their food. And hospitals just don't want people to get sick, period. So like, a lot of like pressurization and stuff like that. I've seen a lot of different, I think I've seen a lot of different, a lot of different products now out more recently, and now you definitely see a change where people want things that are more open, right? We talked about open,
Mm-hmm.
and some people have a really interesting idea of what open is versus what it isn't. And I think what you're gonna get behind people that don't want, that they don't want to pay for licenses, they don't want to pay for that, and I'm like, well, someone made that. Like someone took enough money, or someone spent enough money, even if it's just their time, to make something. I feel like that, from an open perspective, I just want something that is more ubiquitous than anything else. And I may not necessarily need to be, I want more choice in my products rather than just, one specific thing. But maybe that one specific thing works better than a lot of the choices that I may have. Like, well, I can go with this, but I know this works. And some people will just continue to go with what they know.
Yeah.
Here's one I have. If you're working with, let's say if you're working with a vendor, what is summer like, or I guess, well, maybe it doesn't have to be a vendor, but in general, like, what if someone like really pitched to you like a revolutionary idea? Like, what's the hardest truth that you have to tell them? Like, hey, this is really bad. So like, how do you guide them from that disappointment to a more viable solution?
Yeah, I think it's probably it has to do with how they differentiate, right? Because a lot of companies, and I sometimes work with companies at an early stage where they're trying to refine their pitch deck, and they're trying to, maybe it's parts of the pitch deck, competitive landscape, market sizing, maybe it's more broadly, how compelling do you think this is, and maybe play the role of the investor before I go talk to the investors. So I would say that there can be an overwhelming focus on product innovation or product differentiation, and not so much on like value differentiation is how I would term it, right? So like you're doing something different, but when you tell me the benefit to the building, it's the same value prop that a lot of other firms would also have, right? So that's maybe not going to be as compelling to the buyers, and it's hard for them to hear that because their view might be, oh, this is really innovative. And it's like what you're doing is innovative from a product point of view, but like, well, how does that translate into value in the market? And that's where there can be a little bit of a question. So that's one. I also think sometimes there's a bit of a gap or a jump from we've built a product that's great to we just need to hire salespeople and go sell it. And I've actually been tweeting, or not tweeting, but sharing on LinkedIn. I don't know I've been LinkedIning, linking, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. But everyone knows it. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, not really active on Twitter. But my point being, sometimes I hear this where companies say, oh, we've built the product, we have product market fit, and like that's like kind of an assumption made based on somebody told us they want to buy this. And we just have to go get the word out, right? And I'm not really the guy to help you get the word out. I mean, obviously, I can help you think through how do you get the word out, but it's not like I'm going to be your salesperson. I'm going to be your marketing arm. But my point there is, yeah, there's definitely sometimes a gap where you have to think about how you go to market, what story you're telling, what you're really doing, how compelling is this, rather than, oh, that's great, we just need more people, like more eyeballs, right? It kind of becomes the product issue is viewed as we've built the product and somebody bought it, therefore it's the right product for the market. It's like that's one buyer, not the market. And the other side is, oh, so then the playbook is we want as many people as possible to see what we're doing and understand it, and that will in the funnel lead to more sales.
Sure. Yeah. Sometimes when I hear we need more salesmen, okay, why do we need more salesmen? Well, we just need more salesmen. Okay. I mean,
Yeah.
well, what are we going to do with those salesmen? Right? Like, sure, you may say like, oh, I just need to do this. Well, you know, like some people just they get tunnel vision and like, oh, well, this is a reason why. Well, is it really the reason why? Like, let's take the blinders off and find out. So speaking of
Yeah.
that, like, what are the three like non-negotiable sanity checks that a manufacturer should pass before they spend another dollar on their product?
Yeah, I actually, this is more of a metric for smaller firms, but I think you could look at a business unit within a larger firm in the same lens. Because at the end of the day, you are investing money in building an offering, building a product, and your goal is to get sales out of it, right? And make money. If you look at companies in the smart building space, and this isn't a full sample set, this is just a few dozen companies where I could actually get the right data. What you find is if you wanted to put up kind of what I call a capital efficiency metric, how much scale do you have as measured by square feet deployed to, and how much money have you raised? Now, the gap there is there are some companies that haven't raised a lot, but actually have big businesses. They're generating a lot of revenue, and they can put that revenue back into the product. But let's just say for a second, we're at a pre-revenue state. We want to make an initial investment in the company. I would say a good metric is you probably want about $1 million invested to get to every 10 million square feet of scale. And so obviously you're probably putting more than $1 million into the business to begin with, but whatever you're putting in, you should map it to $1 million. Each million I spend should get me to 10 million square feet of real estate. So if you spend 10 million, you should probably get to 100 million square feet before you put a lot more money in. This is a rough guideline. I wouldn't say this is like a hard and fast rule, but the challenge you often get is companies get 30, 40, 50 million into the business, and they haven't gotten much more than tens of millions of square feet. So they're almost kind of 10x the wrong way. And what I mean by that is they should have 10 times the scale for that much money.
Yep.
So that's a good benchmark that I would keep in mind. And my point there is that while you might say, oh, it's going to cost us $30 million to build this, I would argue that you can probably point to some vendors in your space that have built something comparable to what you've done, and you could point to them doing it in a much more capital efficient way. I would also argue getting out into the market quickly to start generating some revenue helps this, right? Because you don't have to raise as much money. You can use some of the revenue, but there are some companies that keep building with less of a focus on actually getting some early feedback and early customer validation through revenue, which is kind of like a good way to measure that. So that's like the core thing I would advise. But I would also say that if you have a lot of, and I don't know that I have three, but the second one, because that was really long-winded, thanks for bearing with me. But for the second one, I would say you need to make sure that you're touching the market needs and not just loud customer needs, right? It's good to have demanding customers. It's good to get the feedback from the customers, but what you don't want is individual customers to have an outsized impact on what you're building. And I've seen this, I've had this as a product manager. This is a really fine line because on one hand, you want the feedback, you need some early validation, but you don't necessarily want to be in this position where we have these three customers that have like such demands that they're taking up all of our development bandwidth or our development cycles. Because then what you might find 2-3 years later is, oh, we've built all these capabilities, these customers like what we're doing, but we've kept them happy, but we haven't really been able to do it in a profitable way. And meanwhile, there's this whole other cohort of buyers and users that, man, this doesn't resonate with them because they just have different needs. And this gets back to that first point I talked about, like product market fit. Having somebody buy your product, especially in our market with all the fragmentation, isn't going to necessarily be validation that you have product market fit. It's like you have customer market or product customer fit is probably the best way to put it if you had to put a term on it.
Yeah, I think that's you bring up a good point where sometimes a manufacturer needs to just put something in the market to take some of that to generate some revenue to help to continue to fund their their project. I think some cases that they should be careful of that, because especially like, let's say you put it out and then no one's buying it because maybe there are some people that had a bad experience with it, right? And so then
Yeah.
that people get wind of that, and then it's like, oh, so there is a fine line. And I think, like, if you start out with something a little more, something simpler than than what maybe you were originally expecting, and then allowing people like, hey, well, what about this and that? And now you may have already been working on it, but now you know that people are liking what you have, but now they want this feature or that feature. It's like, oh, cool. Well, now, hey, now we know that that's what they want. We can actually add those. We can add those features together now with less money.
Exactly.
So, one thing that I have been seeing a lot over the last few years is a massive consolidation with big players acquiring smaller innovators, right? Like you're seeing these big, you're seeing these big companies just starting to buy up other smaller companies. So, I guess the question I have is, do you view this as a necessary maturation of the industry that stabilizes the market? Or is it a threat to the agility and creativity that we truly need to make building smarter?
And I want to make sure I understand the first part of your question. Just the basis of a threat or a driver of innovation.
Yes.
I mean, I would say I think it's a huge opportunity in general. This fact that smart building tech does add value on top of what you're already getting. I think sometimes there's this view of, oh, I already have a controls system. I already have a building automation system. I don't need smart building technology. I would argue they work together. There's a complementary nature to both of these solutions and tools. So I think that's a really core theme to keep in mind. So I see it very much as an opportunity, but I think you could also argue the legacy businesses that are really focused on selling controls, they could see disruption. There was an interesting white paper. It was actually from McKinsey 5, maybe 10 years ago. I sometimes share it because it's interesting data, but they were trying to map out what's the market growth opportunity in connected building technology, right? And they called it connected building technology, but it was really all building, like base building systems, building automation, so on and so forth. And what they noted was that there's going to be significant growth, but basically no growth of the traditional, what they called the traditional building controls or traditional building automation system. They said a lot of the growth will be energy management, energy monitoring, energy analytics, and then a lot of the kind of connected and analytical solutions that would sit on top or maybe in some cases replace the core building automation system. So the market will see big growth, but a lot of the growth will not be what you think of as I deployed field controllers, I deployed valves and actuators that were connected to the field controllers, and then I have a supervisory controller. That will not go away, but it won't really grow. So you could argue that that is potentially a threat to some of the vendors who are indexing too much towards traditional controls. I don't know that that's happening, though, because really every company I look at has some smart building strategy. Maybe various levels of investment, various levels of sophistication. They've been doing it a long time. They've been doing it not as long. But I think they all see that opportunity too. So I think there are some threats and opportunities, but I also think a lot of firms are probably addressing them in the right way.
Yeah, and I think also, it comes at, like, when you see, a bigger, like a bigger company buying a smaller company, that thus making it a bigger company because now they're part of a bigger conglomerate. Like, I think sometimes that scares other, I think that scares other companies, because it's like, well, now they have the resources of this versus what they used to have the resources for. And so now they can take those resources and now push what they wanted to be pushing. And now you've got some of these smaller companies who are like, man, how do we continue to push out things when we're seeing everyone else now with this kind of backing pushing out things at a significantly faster pace? And I argue with some of those companies that, like, look, just because they're pushing out something at a faster pace doesn't mean it's better, right? Like, there is a thing that people get tired of all these products getting pushed, and there is a fatigue of that. It's like, oh man, they have something else out already. Like, I just bought this stuff. Now what do I do about this is out, right? So if some of the smaller companies can focus on the two or three things that they're really good at, and just give people what they need out of that, I think they'll be okay. And sometimes people think that stalls innovation, but I think that there isn't. I think that there is a need to be comfortable in your shell, and knowing what you're good at versus what you aren't good at, I think is going to make you a more successful company.
Yeah, I think so too. I do. No, it's well said.
So, we talked about you mentioned buzzwords earlier in this podcast, and I think really early, and as I say, really early in the long ago. I like using a lot of movie quotes, and sometimes I'll use The Land Before Time. So, I think in the beginning we mentioned some buzzwords there. So, like looking, like, let's say 5 to 10 years out, like beyond the buzzwords of AI and digital twins, what is the boring but critical change that you think that will actually define the next generation of smart building products?
I think maybe there's two kind of in the boring point. I think like data infrastructure, data middleware, data layers, however you want to frame it, I think there's a lot that can happen there to really enable the application layer to deliver and drive more value. So I think that's one. The other boring one I would say is look at how we buy and sell products in buildings today, right? There's the channel is what we always called it when I was at JCI, but it's like the indirect channel is really what I mean, right? We, as an OEM, have our own branches, but there's a lot of products selling through independents, like independent distributors, independent integrators, a lot of different types of integrators if you really like break it down. And I think that a lot of the innovative companies in our market don't have full recognition or understanding of how that indirect channel or the different types of indirect ways to market can really be powerful, right? They might view it more as, oh, I'm going to go find the big owners of real estate and sell to them. And you can do that, right? I'm not saying don't do that, but I'm saying that that's actually only part of the story. And I think it's kind of boring to think through, well, what are my channels to market? How should I go to market? Who should I sell through? How does this work? How does my pricing change or my packaging change, given that I maybe don't have to deliver the entire full solution or full product, as I would term it? I can deliver a lot of it and give kind of a tool set to people to build on top of it, or configure it for a building. That's pretty boring too, but I think it's a really critical point.
Yeah, I also think tagging, within the next, I wouldn't even argue 5 to 10 years. I think, in the next even 2 to 3, that that tagging, I think, really is going to be, I think, a thing where people are really going to work to make that process extremely automated to help people with a lot of, to combine a lot of the data that they have.
Yeah. No, I think so. I think there are cases where we jump ahead to what I mean by that is like you might be a buyer of these solutions. You might jump ahead to what can I do at the application layer to improve what I'm doing today, and like that is important. But sometimes there's less attractive or more boring pieces to really think about the data, the data layer. Yeah.
Yep, and I, and we use the word boring, but like, I mean, I don't necessarily find much boring specifically, because I think that there are a lot of things that can be just absolutely imperative to do. And I know that some people just don't want to take the effort to put forth in there, but I think once they understand the fruits of their labor and where things are going, I think they'll want to make a more conscious effort to get those things off the ground. So I guess one last question I have here. We're doing pretty good in time and conversation.
Sure. Yeah. No, it's fun. It's gone by fast.
So let's say for the manufacturers that are listening, who want to survive the coming years of consolidation and competition, what's the one quality or mindset that's going to separate those companies that fade away from the ones that become indispensable to the built environment?
think the big difference here between, scaling and not, I think there's a few, an eye to what does the market need versus, is the product voice in me or the product manager in me says, you figure out the market opportunity, not necessarily just like the individual customer opportunity. But I think that the other side of it is deployment and kind of long-term ability to scale with and support clients. Oftentimes, smaller, less resourced companies have trouble maintaining support and the relationship over the long term. And for good reason, right? Like they have to grow, they're expected to grow, they're trying to chase new deals, they have limited resources. What that can translate into is, existing customers sometimes falling by the wayside or parts fall by the wayside. And I think that's when I talk to a buyer of a solution who says, I bought a solution, this is what it did well, this is what it did poorly, this is why I'm looking for something new, or I'm trying to kind of change my approach. Sometimes it's that it was great for a while, but over time, I had more and more trouble using the product, or I found that the new features were not being rolled out as quickly, or as I had questions or had needed additional support just to get the most out of my product, customer success, you could argue, is kind of how that's termed. I found I was increasingly disappointed. And I sometimes tell them, like, this is probably why you experienced that. Don't necessarily blame this company itself, but this is why what you experience is what you experience. And they kind of recognize, it's tough out there being a small company competing with giants. But that's probably what I would share to your question.
Yeah, and I also think that some obviously there are a lot of the larger companies who are like, well, they're a small company. Well, any large company was a small company at some point, right? Like it's not like it's not like they just, oh, I'm going to be a big conglomerate and have 10,000 employees one day because I have endless trunks of money and that's what I just want to do. No, like they start off very small, regardless of where they're coming from, whether it's just two men in a truck or maybe someone just working like out of the garage of their house, and then all of a sudden now like they have found their footing in the market, and slowly but surely people begin believing in that product, and then all of a sudden it just takes that one little opportunity to go from small to very big. And also I think that people that smaller companies need to understand that you are going to just have to take those risks, and make sure that people understand what separates you from the larger people. Sometimes it's a sense of of being personable. Like I know that there was a company that was seemingly small, and they had you could call the front you called the front desk and you spoke to a real person, and they were sweet, and there was a sweet lady up front, and like you got that every single time. And that's what a lot of people liked, because they weren't a number, they weren't anything, they were you were talking to a real person, it made you feel real. And then now as you get larger, now all of a sudden it's like, oh well, now I'm just talking to an automated machine, and now I feel like you're one of them. So I think like in certain cases, what can separate you, I think people need to understand that that is your strength, and continue to stay that course. And I think if you stay that course, eventually you will get larger, but you still have to not forget who you were as you came about that journey. And I think that some companies lose sight of that.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's well said.
Okay. Well, Joe, it has been a pleasure having you on the show. I really have enjoyed. I've really enjoyed your enthusiasm. I've enjoyed your energy that you have brought to the show, and also I've really appreciated your insight. So I'm glad that I didn't really get to do a whole lot of research up front, because I really learned a lot about you through this show, and about what about what you're about. So I really have appreciated the time here.
Yeah, thanks. No, it's fun to have these open-ended, long-form discussions and just see where the conversation takes us. But it's been great to be with you both. Thanks for the good questions, and I'm sure we'll connect again soon, and hopefully in person at a local event.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to be at AHR. I know Matthew is going to be at AHR. Will you be at AHR?
I will be at AHR, so I'll see you both there, and anyone else who's listening, assuming this goes live before then, yeah, I'd love to meet and connect.
And that's all we have for this episode. Remember to stay curious and deploy your technology wisely. Until next time, I'm Charles.
And I'm Matthew.
And this has been It's a Controls Problem. Hey, Matthew. I don't know if you realize you.
Oh, whoops. I was saying words and stuff. Yeah.